Shortly thereafter, in the early fall of 2010, there was a third confrontation between Netanyahu and Obama. The president had finally been able to start peace talks in early September, but the Palestinians were threatening to walk away from the talks if Israel ended its 10-month partial freeze of settlement building in the West Bank later that month. Obama pleaded with Netanyahu to continue the limited freeze and even offered him a generous aid package just to continue it for 3 more months. But the Israeli Prime Minister rejected his request, and the Palestinians eventually walked away from the peace talks. In sum, Obama has gone toe-to-toe with Netanyahu on 3 separate occasions, and the president has lost each time. This leads to the obvious question: why did Obama lose? One might think that the president should have been in an ideal position to put significant, if not enormous, pressure on Israel to allow the Palestinians to have their own state. The United States, after all, is the most powerful country on the planet, and it should have great leverage over Israel because it gives the Jewish state so much diplomatic and material support. But clearly, Obama had hardly any leverage over Netanyahu, who beat the president hands down all 3 times. Many of Israel's defenders like to argue that the American people identify closely with Israel and put significant pressure on their leaders to support it generously and unconditionally. Thus, there's no way that any president can win a fight with an Israeli leader. But there's an abundant evidence, as Steve noted, showing that this is not true. Various polls over the last few years indicate that over 70% of Americans think that the United States should not take sides in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I want to repeat that. Over 70% of Americans think that the United States should not favor either Israel or the Palestinians in their conflict. And according to a poll released by the BBC 2 months ago, 41% of Americans think that Israel's influence in the world is mainly negative. That's 41%. Moreover, 60% of Americans have said, according to one poll, that the United States should withhold aid to Israel if it resists pressure to reach a peace agreement with the Palestinians. In short, a clear majority of Americans do not favor the special relationship and would back Obama if he leaned on Israel to stop expanding the settlements and accept a Palestinian state. The real reason that Netanyahu has the upper hand over Obama is the Israel lobby, which invariably sides with Israel against the United States when the 2 sides have conflicting interests. And because the lobby is enormously powerful, no president will pick a fight with it. Remember that Alan Dershowitz said that it is perhaps the most effective lobbying and fundraising effort in the history of democracy. The only thing I disagree with Dershowitz in regard to that sentence is the use of the word perhaps. It is the most effective lobbying and fundraising effort in the history of democracy. And of course, President Obama fully understands that. Regarding the 2-state solution, most Israelis are opposed to making the sacrifices that would be necessary to create a viable Palestinian state. And there is little reason to expect that they're going to have an epiphany anytime soon. This attitude is certainly reflected in the present Israeli government. Prime Minister Netanyahu, after all, has made a career of fighting against the 2-state solution. And not surprisingly, a poll that was done in mid-March of this year found that 78% of his Likud party opposed the creation of a Palestinian state. Now, if there was no lobby, Obama could bring massive pressure to bear on Israel to change its policies towards the Palestinians and allow them to have a viable state of their own. But there is. And the lobby simply will not allow the president to put serious pressure on Israel. The clearest evidence of its influence on the Obama administration is the presence of Dennis Ross inside the White House. Ross has a passionate attachment to Israel. And over the course of his career, he has worked for various institutions in the lobby, like the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He is widely regarded as a fervent advocate of Israel's positions inside the White House. Indeed, Abe Foxman, the head of the ADL, recently said that Dennis is the closest thing you'll find to a Melitz Yosher as far as Israel is concerned. A Melitz Yosher is a Hebrew phrase for advocate. And Aaron David Miller, who served with Ross during the Clinton administration, famously said that he and Ross too often acted as Israel's lawyers during the Oslo negotiations. Ross, of course, is not just one of many Middle East experts in the Obama administration. He is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, advisors that Obama has on matters relating to Israel and the broader Middle East. As we now know, he has triumphed over his major competitor, George Mitchell, who just resigned from the administration. All of this is to say that a man who routinely acts as Israel's lawyer is wielding great influence on the making of the Obama administration's Middle East policy. And of course, Dennis Ross is just the tip of a much bigger iceberg. It's no wonder that the president cannot put any meaningful pressure on Israel to force it to change its policies towards the Palestinians. The end result of the lobby's success at thwarting a two-state solution is that there is going to be a greater Israel that bears marked resemblance to white-ruled South Africa. Israelis and their American supporters invariably bristle at the comparison to apartheid South Africa. But that is their future if they continue to colonize the occupied territories and deny full political rights to an Arab population that will soon outnumber the Jewish population in the entirety of the land. Indeed, two former Israeli prime ministers have made this very point. Ehud Olmert, who was Netanyahu's predecessor, said in late November 2007 that if the two-state solution collapses, Israel will face a South African-style struggle. He went so far as to argue in the next sentence that as soon as that happens, the state of Israel is finished. Former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who is now Israel's defense minister, said more recently that as long as in this territory west of the Jordan River there is only one political entity called Israel, it is going to be either non-Jewish or non-democratic. If this bloc of millions of Palestinians cannot vote, that will be an apartheid state. Again, that's Ehud Barak. Other Israelis, as well as Jimmy Carter and Bishop Desmond Tutu, have warned that if Israel does not pull out of the occupied territories, it will become an apartheid state, resembling white-ruled South Africa. But if I am right, the occupation is not going to end, and there will not be a two-state solution. That means Israel will complete its transformation into a full-blown apartheid state over the next decade. In the long run, however, Israel will not be able to maintain itself as an apartheid state. Like racist South Africa, it will eventually evolve into a democratic binational state whose politics will be dominated by the more numerous Palestinians. The main problem that Israel's defenders will face is that it is impossible to defend apartheid because it is antithetical to core Western values. How does one make a moral case for apartheid, especially in the United States, where democracy is venerated and segregation and racism are routinely condemned? It's hard to imagine the United States having a special relationship with an apartheid state. Indeed, it's hard to imagine the United States having much sympathy for one. It's much easier to imagine the United States strongly opposing that racist state's political system and working hard to change it. Of course, many other countries around the globe would follow suit. This is surely why former Prime Minister Olmert said that going down the apartheid road would be suicidal for Israel. What is truly remarkable about this situation is that organizations like AIPAC are effectively helping Israel commit national suicide. What makes this situation even more astonishing is that there is an alternative outcome which would be relatively easy to achieve and is clearly in Israel's best interest, the two-state solution. It is hard to understand why Israel and America's supporters are not working overtime to create a viable Palestinian state, and why instead they are moving full speed ahead to build Greater Israel, which will be an apartheid state. It makes no sense from either a moral or a strategic perspective. Indeed, it is an exceptionally foolish policy. Thank you.